For more reaction to the DA's Federal Congress, I'm joined now by Professor Andre Duvenhage, a political analyst from the Northwest University. Thank you so much for your time, Prof. We do appreciate it this evening. Perhaps just your overall response and reaction to the fact that John Steenhuisen has once again been elected as the DA leader. Many are saying this was expected, given his support and the fact that he has already been the leader of the DA.
Good evening, Heidi. Yes, indeed. I think the conference was a very successful conference. In comparison to, for example, the ANC, there was not a lot of controversy. It was basically process, protocol. I know there are certain questions about the electronic way of voting, but there will be an internal investigation in this regard. But otherwise, it was a sound conference. Looking at the position of John Steenhuisen, yes, indeed, it was expected that he will win the election, and it happened indeed. I think from a DA perspective, this was a good choice because I think he has shown a lot of leadership since the turnaround after the time of Mmusi Maimane, and the DA did perform well in the 2021 election, and at the moment the polls are showing a support base around 25% for the Democratic Alliance. So that was expected. Helen Zille was unopposed in her position, and we have seen some minor changes on the deputy level. What is, however, concerning to the DA is that the leadership is not reflecting diversity. I think Mpho Palatsi can make a difference, and I hope that she is not going to leave the DA because I believe there can be a future role for her within the context of the Democratic Alliance.
Prof, let's touch on that issue around diversity. I was listening to an interview that our colleague Aviwe Mtila was doing with Helen Zille, and she was very upset almost at the constant question around black leaders, especially female black leaders leaving or members leaving the Democratic Alliance, saying that's not necessarily the case. There are other political parties that are experiencing the same kind of exodus, but it doesn't really give an image of diversity and inclusion for the Democratic Alliance, especially leading into the 2024 elections. They don't have a diverse top six leadership, especially when it comes to female representation, but also black representation.
Heidi, yes, indeed, but I think there are two sides to the argument. The one side is that if you look at the 2,000 delegates attending the conference, there was definitely a diversity of people. But it's interesting that that diversity is not reflected in the choice of leadership. Now, on the other side, you can argue this is a democratic process. And in a way, that is constructive for the Democratic Alliance, that people are not necessarily voting according to race or identity, but according to what they believe is merit. And in that sense, it is positive. It is true that a number of leaders have left the Democratic Alliance. Let's say about 10 leaders of Mmusi Maimane, Herman Mashaba, and a few others are prominent. But the fact of the matter is there's still a lot of black leadership within the Democratic Alliance, and the support base are showing also black support. The other reality is that of the 4 or 5 major parties in South Africa, including the EFF as well as the ANC, the DA is more diverse in terms of its constituency than any of its 2 major rival parties.
That might be the case, Prof, but I mean, if you look at the top 6, there is no diversity there. I want to ask you what your response is to the fact that Helen Zille was re-elected unopposed. Why do you think that nobody wanted to contest against her or with her? Because, you know, there are also concerns that it's a position many might not want, but also many might not want to run up against Helen Zille?
I think it's a combination of both. On the one side, if we look at Helen Zille, she was a successful leader of the Democratic Alliance. She was, for more than one term, Premier of the Western Cape, and in governance terms, it was the most successful province of all 9 provinces. So she has a lot of experience bringing to the table. On the other side, if we look at that position, that is not a political position. She is, in fact, the administrative head of the Democratic Alliance. And there you need a person with legitimacy. You do not need a person who has high political aspirations. And this is making her an ideal choice. And after the crisis of the 2019 election, the DA went back to their basics and they decided to appoint a team, and the team selected, amongst others, for Helen Zille to take the party out of that crisis. I think it's a combination of reasons. I had a conversation with her, it was literally a few days back, and she told me this is now her final term in office for the Democratic Alliance.
Let's move over to John Steenhuisen's acceptance speech. He was very vocal about making sure that the ruling party, the ANC, drop below 50% or are completely voted out of power. And he spoke heavily about the EFF and making sure that the ANC and the EFF don't work together. This is clearly a major threat for the Democratic Alliance.
Yes, purely from a scenario perspective, and now I'm not talking John Steenhuisen or Democratic Alliance politics, I also believe that a combination of the ANC and the EFF can be very, very negative for South Africa, especially from an economic investment perspective. And I think it is a dangerous combination. If you look from the perspective of the Democratic Alliance, their specific value system, I can understand John Steenhuisen's concern with specifically the EFF. I still had the opinion that he is leaving the door a bit open for future negotiations with the ANC. I honestly think that at some point in time, there need to be some conversation, some talks between the DA and elements of the ANC. At the moment, coalition politics is very, very unstable, and one of the reasons is the lack of cooperation between the 2 biggest parties in the country.
So it's interesting what you've just said now. Do you think it would be a better coalition for the ANC and the DA to work together?
Well, if they can find each other on basis of values, and I think it is possible, I believe that can bring about the stability we need on a local government level, and that can also be applicable on provincial and national level. But at the moment, from an ANC perspective, their first choice will be to cooperate with some of the smaller parties, the 1%, 2%, 3% parties. But if their support base is dropping towards the low 40s, they may be in a situation where they will need a stronger party. At the moment, the choice is definitely the EFF. And we have seen people like Panjasa Lesufi and also the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, talking in that direction of closer cooperation between the ANC and the EFF. And that is an area of concern for the Democratic Alliance. But I believe there are shared values between the 2 parties. They can work together and they can contribute towards the common good. And this can help us creating more representativity in the structures of politics.
And Prof, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are heading to the 2024 general elections. It's going to be very interesting, and Helen Zille telling us earlier on that it's a mammoth task for the party, given what's at stake.
Yes, John Steenhuisen quite clearly said that they would like to win the election. Now, I don't believe that is going to be that easy. I'm still of the opinion that the ANC support base will be somewhere in the 40s, probably around 45%. At the moment, some of the surveys are indicating a support base for them as low as 37%. Others put it a bit higher, closer to 50%, while the Democratic Alliance is standing on 25%, and the EFF between 10 and 12%. Interesting, a party like the IFP has increased its support base above 5%. And then we have a party like Action South Africa with about 4%. It is interesting that a few weeks ago, there were things in the media telling us about the possibility of cooperation between the IFP and the ANC, especially in KZN, where the ANC support base is dropping. And I can just say that the ANC's own analysis is showing that they may experience trouble in as many as 6 provinces.
It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I'm curious to know, though, Prof, when it comes to the Democratic Alliance and what it stands for and what it wants to tell its voters ahead of the 2024 general elections, how it's going to persuade people to vote. And I ask this in the context of voter apathy. We've seen this, especially amongst younger people that just decide not to vote, just stay away completely. How is John Steenhuisen going to get people to vote, but especially to vote for the DA? Because this is the mission that he's on. He says he wants to get as many votes as possible.
I think that is probably his #1 challenge. And at the moment, all the major parties are struggling with that same problem. We have seen a constant decline of participation in election over the 3 decades. And in the last elections, basically, we end up with a scenario where the ANC is, according to registered voters, a minority party already. But coming to the DA, I think the only thing the DA can do is they can persuade people in terms of their core values, try to get buy-in into the core values. Now, their value systems are democratic in nature, in a way developmental. And then secondly, they can show them what they have achieved in some of the local governments, and especially in the provincial structure of the Western Cape, who is regarded as a huge success. But I think the organization of the party need to assist him in this regard. And we know that, and I think that is where Helen Zille is coming into play. She has a lot of experience. She knows organization work, she knows party structures, and I think she can assist the leadership of the party very much towards the 2024 elections.
Okay, thank you so much for your insights. We really do appreciate it. Thank you. That was Professor Andre Duvenhage, a political analyst from the Northwest University.